Welcome to the Voices of War, a podcast with a simple vision to bring to life the true costs of war through the voices of those who've lived it. I'm your host Maz, and I hope you enjoy this episode. My guest today is Steve Dennis. After working as a civil engineer in Canada in the late 1990s, Steve started working as a field-based humanitarian aid worker in 2002. He worked in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East for various NGOs and UN agencies, which include the World Food Programme, Médecins Sans Frontières, United Nations Department of Safety and Security, and others. In 2012, while working in Kenya, armed men attacked a convoy Steve was travelling in. In the attack, one staff member was killed, and Steve and two other colleagues were wounded. He and three colleagues were later kidnapped by the armed militia, only to be rescued days later in another violent gunfight. In 2015, Steve won a precedent-setting court ruling of gross negligence against his former employer, revealing a disturbingly high level of disregard for staff safety within the organisation. The court also shed some much-needed light on the need to care for injured staff, which is another topic rarely discussed. Steve now works with individuals and organisations along the path from injury and grievance to recovery, as well as skills development and growth. This work is not only related to better navigating the landscapes of an organisation's duty of care and risk management, but also capacity development in program management, leadership, and breaking stigmas on mental health issues. Steve, it's a pleasure to host you on the podcast. Welcome to the Voices of War.
Thank you, Maz. Great to be here.
So, just to get us started, I'm slightly perplexed. You were a civil engineer living in a wealthy and stable country that is Canada. How did you find your way into the world of humanitarian aid and development work?
Yeah, that's a great question. It wasn't by any sort of design at all. I was working for a engineering firm, and one of the high-paying clients called me in saying, we have an emergency. And I guess there was this little bit of water leakage into this penthouse suite, and some paint was bubbling up a little bit. And I said, well, what's the emergency? And she said, well, I'm having a dinner party in a couple of weeks, and I will die if my guests see that. And I guess just that morning, I'd seen on the headlines in the newspaper that 20,000 people were displaced by an earthquake or something. And that contrast really hit me hard. And over the next couple of days, that story had gone to the third page, the seventh page, 20th, and then off the newspaper very quickly. And I just didn't think that those 20,000 people were back on their feet and everything well. At the same time, somebody said, hey, I should work with an aid organization doing logistics. And I thought, yeah, actually, that's the client I want to work for. People who are having a real emergency. So, yeah, I packed my bags and headed off. Yeah.
Wow. Well, hey, talk about an interesting way to introduce you to see the contrast between quote unquote first world problems and then the problems that the rest of the world faces. I guess that's interesting. Have you had any exposure previously? Anyone in your family have done any kind of this type of work or?
No, not at all. I actually didn't really know what it was, aid work. I was blind to it. I hadn't traveled outside of Canada except for one trip to the UK. And in my interview, they said, no, we're looking for people who've traveled but all over Canada. That's our backyard. And the UK, that's our neighbor's backyard. How about a bit further? No, I was probably as green as they come. And I got declined at that interview. And I asked, well, what should I do? And somebody said, well, I don't know, go to Guatemala or somewhere and get off the trail and really see if this is what you want to do. And it was the best advice ever. I did find myself in Guatemala 2 weeks later and off the trail. And it was very good to do that on my own time. I think a lot of people get into this work and don't really know what it is. And I think it was the best advice to find out what it is so that when you are on the ground performing, you're through a lot of that stuff first. So
okay. So what
Yeah.
do you mean you went to Guatemala as a volunteer of some fashion, or?
No, this person's advice was pretty blank. Go there, just go there for 6 weeks, learn some Spanish, get off the trail, go as far as you could,
Okay.
as far as you can. So I did that. I
Oh
didn't know
wow.
any Spanish. I got out to a place to learn some Spanish, and a couple of English speaking people found me. And they said, "Oh, great, we can speak English." And I thought, "Oh, I have to go further." So I actually found myself up in the mountains in a remote place where they didn't speak any more Spanish. They were speaking a Mayan dialect, and so that well, I'm learning less Spanish, but that wasn't really the objective. I was yeah, living in a small room, getting sick off of the food, and it was a good time to, yeah, really get into a developing country, a remote place, and really figure out what's important to me, and that really motivated me. My employer at the time thought I would get it out of my system, but no, it actually solidified some motivation to do this type of work. Yeah.
That's excellent. I must say that's I can't say I've heard that too often. To actually just okay, you want me to go and get an understanding of what I'm getting into? Okay, I'll just go and
Gonna do that.
yeah. That's really interesting. And what happened from there? What was then your first actual job in the field?
Yeah. So actually, I talked to the recruitment officer and said, "Hey, hola,
Done my
¿qué
6 weeks.
tal?" Well, no, actually, I'm 2 weeks into it. I'd like to see a project. This is with Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without
Right.
Borders,
Hmm.
and yeah, I wanted to see a project there. And she said, "Well, we typically don't let people visit the projects like that, but okay, fair enough. You're motivated. We want you to join a introductory course." And then I flew out to Sri Lanka. So I went to the rebel-held area in Sri Lanka in the north, by the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. And at the time, there was a ceasefire, and it was holding, and there was peace talks, and they were holding, and it was an interesting time of definitely seeing the ruins of war and the trauma through people. But it was decent times for us. There was no active fighting. People were going home. When people went home, there was an upsurge of all the landmines and other remnants of war. But then, yeah, things closed down. Actually, we started handing over to development agencies that were coming in, and we were finishing our emergency medical operations and leaving. And yeah, that was 5 years, sorry, 4 years before I went back when fighting restarted, and we were almost doing an opposite handover of taking over from some of the similar actors when they would leave and we would get back in. And yeah, I went back in there.
Wow. So how long were you with Médecins Sans Frontières? That was a few years.
9 years.
Oh wow.
Yeah, 9
Okay.
years I was with them. Yeah, and yeah, great organization. Yeah.
And I guess one of the things and that's I couldn't agree more. It's a great organization. I've met a couple of people throughout my life that have worked with or for the organization. But for some people, it might not be intuitively clear why an engineer would be there. What kind of work were you doing? Because I suspect you weren't in the medical space, but what kind of things were you doing?
So I was doing a lot of logistics and project coordination. So when you think of a healthcare project, possibly we'd be in a remote area running a hospital or some clinics that are basic healthcare clinics. You'd have a team of people. So definitely the medical expertise, that with doctors and nurses, nutritionists maybe as well. But then you have a whole side of it that is the support side. So all the medicines that are being prescribed need a supply chain to get them up in the right quantities and cold chain and warehouses and good stock keeping so you don't run out of essential medications. You need other logistic support, vehicles and shelters and food. Often it's overlooked, but patients need to eat. And if they have a caretaker, if you want them taking care of the patient, they need to eat too. So a lot of that type of stuff. A lot of the areas that they work are insecure. So there has to be some security management, and that's a lot of liaison with the people that are there. We might be in a rebel-held area or a non-government held area, so you have to talk with the local authorities and explain what you're doing, and kind of come to an agreement that you can work there, and their people will understand your work and allow you to work there and have this free, neutral access to people. Yeah. So there's a lot as an engineer. Yeah, some of it is the skills that you build. Like engineering gives you a toolbox of tools, and a lot of that's great. Oh, okay. If like I've done water and sanitation roles in this, if somebody needs 20 liters per person per day, and there's 1,000 of them, as okay. We need to start getting some more trucks or some more options besides trucks, water trucks to come in. And and then a lot of it is emergency planning. You might not know what's needed for an emergency because wars change. How long is a war? How developed is a war? Well, we don't know really. So you plan for what you know, and you plan for some other contingencies that come up, and that's in your own safety, but it's also in the program operation.
I mean, coming from a military background, that's music to my ears, and that's kind of our bread and butter. Is to kind of plan operations and manage operations and account for the various aspects. But I wonder, in the in that world, have you received training to do that, or was this kind of skills that you brought with you, or kind of learn on the job type stuff? Because I mean, planning in itself, there's an art and a science to planning successful operations. Yeah, I just wonder how that actually happened. Where did you get the skills for that?
Yeah. It's a mix for sure. I think a lot of aid workers and aid agencies might be a bit jealous at the structure of learning through a military preparation and training pre-deployments. Militaries, I think, talk about months or portions of a year to pre-deploy train beyond the basic training. For humanitarian aid agencies, I was privileged with a 2-week training as an introduction to the organization, its activities, and some technical know-how. But that's pretty extensive, and that's not happening anymore with that organization. Sometimes when you talk about security training for a personal security course, 4-day training is about top notch or the top end of the 4 days in person. There's some online things that complement it. But for me, a lot of on the job things. A couple of courses. And some good mentors as well. I definitely appreciate the mentorship of some people who have laid out certain principles. I remember one time after an evacuation in South Sudan, and everything was looted, just in tears of what we've built. And this is the second time or the third time that everything was lost. And why do we go back? And to a younger aid worker, you definitely have these questions. You're confronted with these impossible situations, and to have somebody say, well, let's break it down. The needs are still there. Yeah, the needs are there. Okay. The donors, they're actually informed, and they know what's going on, and they know that sometimes you need to buy a backup and another backup of things. Okay. And it's safe enough for us to be there. Okay. Well, what more is needed from that? There's the principle of it. Do we stop at this time or the next time? Let's keep going.
Reality check, I guess. Yeah.
I was really privileged to have a lot of influential people like that give me some good principles to get through that difficult landscape.
No, I asked that question because I think as we get deeper into our conversation, I think that idea of planning becomes rather relevant for the incident that we'll discuss shortly. But it's certainly it's certainly an area that I'm keen and interested in, because I've seen some fantastic planning in the development sector during my time when I worked in Iraq as a development consultant, but I've also seen some absolute lapses in. Well, I won't even credit we calling it planning. It was, making stuff up on the fly is probably, more than it was. But let's then just kind of move forward to in your career. So 9 years with Médecins Sans Frontières, that's quite an extensive chunk of a career. Where else did you go from there? And then how did you end up in Kenya?
Yeah, so actually, the first contract I had afterwards, I wanted to branch out a little bit. I did think that cross-fertilization of ideas it would be a positive thing. So I thought it'd be a decent career step to move on to another organization. And that's what brought me to Kenya, to the Dadaab refugee camp, just on the border of Somalia in the northeast.
Yeah. And what kind of work were you doing in the camp?
Yeah, so this was back in 2011. There was a famine in East Africa at that time, and the camp at the time was about 300,000 people were registered there. And over the course of the first 4 months that I'd gotten there, so about 120 days, there was on average about another 1,000 to 1,200 people coming in per day. And these are people walking in from Somalia. And I guess the nuanced difference between a drought, which is a weather problem, and a famine, which is an inability to feed people, is usually a political thing is related there. The same rainfall was happening on both sides of the border, or lack of rainfall, depending on the situation. But definitely the ability to feed people in Somalia was having a harder time because of the political situation. So people were fleeing from Somalia, seeking refuge, and this was famine related. Of course, the insecurity in Somalia added to the drought being a famine. But so over a year, there's about 160,000 additional people that came into the camp and were registered there. So 463,000 people, I think, by the end of that influx were registered there. My role in there was working as an emergency coordinator. So when that's happening, the spotlight of world attention is moved over to situations like that, and we definitely were in that spotlight. So many more agencies were coming in. The agencies that were there as well were hiring many more people. So you want shelter people, you want water, you want health, you want food. Just the various different areas of needs for people. And this is very much what an emergency looks like. People will die if they don't have essentials. Let's get the essentials there. Let's get quantities and sort out the details later. So as an emergency coordinator there, the agency I was working with, we were doing water, we were doing food, and we were doing shelter. And in bulk quantities. So people clearing land and setting up hundreds of tents every day, and knowing that these tents only last 6 months, but if people don't get tents in that heat and that wind and dust, that'll be a health problem, and then their end. So doing a lot of that coordinating with other agencies, who's doing what, so that we can make sure we're not duplicating the same thing, and making sure that we're not missing too many others. But it's that first phase of an emergency. It's quite messy, but that's what I went in, and I guess because of my experience in emergencies before, they felt it valuable, and that's what I was doing. Yeah.
Sounds like a hugely responsible job. So you were the reception basically for the other organizations, and you were then funneling them left, right, and center, or had you also arrived and there was another organization there? Were you the first? Were you the first and the only one on the ground initially?
No, this camp had actually been around for about 20 years. So, right. So many established agencies were there, and I would say geez, probably if you add up all the what's called national staff or staff from that area that are working for an agency, plus the ones from the country and from other countries, you would probably have 5,000 aid workers there of that magnitude for that size of operation. Yeah. You also have contractors that are doing things. So when I say clearing land and setting up tents, hundreds of tents, that's a small job for one agency. Hiring, we probably had more than 100 people, contractors, or local casual labor. So it's a massive operation. It doesn't funnel through one agency or whatnot. So the World Food Program, bringing in food and having many agencies that could help spread that food out to the people. If you think of 400,000 people, 4 people per household, that's 100,000 households. It takes a while to get food to people in the right quantities, and water, 20 liters per person per day. Okay, so we're close to a sizable portion of 1 million liters of water per day. It's massive systems. I was just the emergency coordinator for one agency to meet with the other coordinators on shelter issues. Then we would put a plan together on shelter, water things. And I must say that first phase, it's messy and it's stressful, but I think through better skills, better preparation, better plans, you can do a better job. Or you can be messy and
it's probably the most important phase of the operation, right? Because it'll also set the tone for how it unfolds. But it's amazing. That's the numbers you're talking about. It's like running effectively a small city. Or establishing the administration for a small city, except you now also have people who are refugees who don't necessarily have incomes, don't have work to go to. There's no schools, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just I just don't think most of us can visualize the complexities that come with that, or the chaos that can ensue in a moment over food, over water, and so on. I suspect you've seen a fair bit of that, and I think it must have been a great fortuitous coincidence that you are also a civil engineer. So that background would have been rather useful in those circumstances. But I suspect you've witnessed some pretty chaotic scenes in those first days.
Yeah, I would say chaotic, desperate, and I think besides the physical things that you can give people, if you can extend dignity, if you can make sure your assistance is dignified, I think that's a point to the quality of something being there. I've seen two different groups getting the exact same thing, but when it's explained to somebody, here's what we have for you, and we know it's not enough, and our plans are to get more, whether it's food or water or healthcare or whatever, that gives people such a better ability to get through their day than when something is dropped off, no explanations of what's coming next, or is that for everyone? Is that for half? So I definitely, it's a hard place to work, but I do appreciate that when you can bring a situation from desperate and indignified to a more dignified response, that's huge. And even though, my engineering background is a numbers thing, 2,100 kilocalories per person per day for food, this much, that many tons, so many tons per truck, and those numbers. But and it's difficult to focus on that, because those numbers, if you get them right, you can get the right assistance to people. But if you lose track that those are humans, then you've gone too much into the robot side. But if you're too focused on one person and their situation, then you lose track of the numbers that you have to take care of as well. So it's a very tricky balance, I must say. Yeah, and geez, my heart goes out to the people who are doing this. Like, it's a hard job. Yeah.
Well, I guess it's that art and science of planning, right? We mentioned before. So maybe let's zero in to 2012, the incident that happened. Can you give us the kind of wave tops of what occurred and how you got there?
So I guess starting off on the context. So the famine really hit in the previous year, 2011, in the middle of the year. Things had kind of tapered down a little bit and stabilized a bit more. But there was another dynamic happening, that some insecurity was happening in the camps. At the time, there was bombs that were going off, or these improvised explosive devices. The Kenyan military had gone into Somalia, and I have a hard time, or I try not to speculate all the reasons behind that, but they were there, and there was some opposition to that. So some of the insecurity in the camp was showing this opposition. So the bombs in the camps. There was a couple of kidnaps that happened later in 2011. 3 people, 2 from one organization, 1 from another organization, were taken, and they were gone. They were in Somalia and had effectively disappeared.
And they were they were kidnapped in the camp as well.
In the camps,
okay.
Yeah. And actually, after the kidnap of them, even though there was some use of armed escorts for the convoys of aid vehicles going around, it really got quite strict after that. So all convoys would have an armed escort in it. And for VIP visits, when there's other members, you would have possibly 2 armed escorts and more police presence. Again, as you were mentioning, the size of that area was like a small city. So yeah, the police force for a small city, or actually a mid-sized city, would be thousands of police officers. That was not the case here. It was less. So it was a limited resource, but whenever we needed it, we could have them, and we used them for all of our convoy movements.
And sorry, they were Kenyan police, or they were international?
Kenyan police. Kenyan police.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so I guess by the middle of 2012, numbers had stabilized. This insecurity of these bombs going off and hitting these police vehicles and police officers, and several of them had died in their service there. That was going on. So some slowing down of operations because of this insecurity, as well. That spotlight had kind of moved on a little bit. There was a famine last year, but it's kind of boring this year, even though all of those people had eaten their animals that normally reproduce and are more sustainable. All their crops are gone. They ate the seeds that would have been planted for next year, still in security so that they can't go back. And they're all hungry, and they're all like, it wasn't a one-off, here's your food, you're good. It's a maintenance thing. So there's less of a spotlight on the situation. The organization I worked for decided to bring out the Secretary General and to do a bit of a PR visit to get some good stories and photos and raise some awareness of what was going on in the camp, that still there's a need there. And so this VIP visit was planned in, I guess, the end of June in 2011. So with that, I guess in the weeks leading up to that, unfortunately, this is a breakdown of plans on, I guess, the security people planning for a well-managed security visit, but then other plans, I guess, compromising that and not really linking in with that. anyways, there was rocks being painted, there was trees being planted. Everything must look perfect for the Secretary General's visit next week. Staff meetings with more than 100 people told about this. And for the visit, I guess we had met at the airport, the visitors. Just the night before, there was a decision to make the visit lower profile. So they decided to do away with the police escorts, the front and back police escorts. But we would go ahead to all the places where there was meetings lined up with refugee representatives or other people in the camps, as well as bringing in about 60 casual laborers who were on their day off, but to bring them in to show what some of the shelter building operations were. So this visit went on. I guess some would say it was low profile because we didn't have police escorts, but we had white Land Cruisers, flags from the organization. We left the airport and drove through the camp. We stopped at various places to have these meetings. And after the last stop in one of the camps we had left there's 3 vehicles. I was in the lead vehicle. A lot of the VIPs were in the middle, and then there was a third vehicle with some others. And right at that moment, 3 people had come out of a hidden place in front of us and started shooting. Our driver, we were on loose sand, and the driver tried to accelerate to get us out of there, and the shooting continued. I got shot in my leg quite early on in this. And he tried to go forward, but the wheels are spinning. He went back and got caught in a barbed wire fence. I tried going forward again, and the car stalled and couldn't move anymore. The person behind me got shot as well, and the driver got out and he was shot as well. So the 3 of us in that vehicle were shot. The middle car was able to turn to the side and break through a fence and get away. And but the third vehicle, 3 other people had come around that vehicle, tried to convince that driver to stop, and he didn't. He tried to accelerate out. He was only going 5 or 10 kilometers an hour at the time, and they shot him 4 times, once in the head, and he was killed there. One other person in the vehicle shot. From there, they took the third vehicle up to where I was. I was taken out of the vehicle and put into it, and myself, along with 3 others, were taken. We were kidnapped, and they picked up 2 more people out, the attackers, and we left.
We'll definitely pick up there. I just want to backtrack to one point you made. The night before the VIP visit, it was decided that the police escort would be removed. What forced that decision, and who made that decision?
Yeah, it was unclear to us. I guess, I was brought into a meeting. I was actually, at the time, in a different role. I had, since the emergency was down, I was put into an HR and admin and logistics role. But because of my previous knowledge of the camps, a day or 2 before the visit, I was put onto the visit. So a lot of this was new to me, but I was brought into a meeting, and I was told that security in Nairobi had determined that this was the better way forward. We later found out that security was not involved in that decision, but some of the decision makers who were not part of the security technical advisory group, they had decided that because there was bombs in the camp, and the bombs were hitting police, that if we took away the police, then we wouldn't be hit by the bombs. And they had also said later in court that because there hadn't been kidnaps in 8 months and 9 months since those last ones, the kidnap risk had gone down. Now, I guess what they didn't focus on is after those kidnaps, there was a strict adherence to always having an escort around, because it was felt that with an escort, kidnappers wouldn't attempt a kidnap. And there's also 2 months before information that came out that security had known about, and some of the decision makers may have received these emails that there was a report saying that there are 1 or 2 kidnap groups in the camps planning to kidnap from international NGOs. And we've got this from 3 unrelated sources, so we feel it's valid. But I guess there was a miscalculation there. People that were unqualified and removed from the technical security expertise making the decisions on technical security decisions. So that was, I guess, later flagged as one of the several issues.
Yeah, of course. And again, just complacency guiding down, but maybe complacency or negligence guiding down the wrong path, I guess.
I think there was some optimism. If nothing happens, then I think people say, nothing happens. Also, for kidnap risk, you think about it as an aid agency. Well, we're helping people, so why would somebody want to do us harm? So I think there's a bit of thought there, and definitely I've worked in areas where I've thought that, not where kidnap was a thing, but and actually that's quite true in a lot of ways. There's a saying, no program without security and no security without program. And I really take that to trying to deliver high-end programs so that people would say, no, actually, we want you here. We like what you're doing. When we had a problem, we talked about it and we came to an agreement, because you can always have a problem. One of your vehicles might go too fast and hit a goat or hit a child, and to work through some of these problems with the community. And in the end, they say, no, we still value you here. We don't want to hurt you. But I think the key point is to know when that is correct and know when that is incorrect. And again, going back to this place, as big as a mid-sized city, if generally people feel that way, well, you also have to worry about the people that don't. They don't know what you're doing, or they might have a grievance against the organization and might say, yeah, you know what, I they're not safe in my mind. So.
Yeah. Well, it comes down to the risk matrix, right? The risk profile that you understand, what are the threat to, who is the threat, what capabilities they have, what is their intent, all of these things that come into play. And I suspect that's where you're making the point, that it was unqualified people making the decision. Okay. So without getting too sidetracked, honing back in on the actual incident. So you were wounded in your leg. I suspect walking was an issue. What kind of a injury was this? Did you need immediate treatment? Obviously, you needed treatment, but how critical was the injury?
Well, I think as a military person, you'll appreciate I was quite lucky with my gunshot wound. A couple of things happened. The bullet went through the door, which is not bulletproof, but it slowed it down. Then it went through my wallet. Then it went into my leg. And to add to the luck, I was supposed to fly out that afternoon. So I actually filled up my wallet with a bunch of extra cash and all my credit cards, credit card, bank cards. So it was the thickest that it would have been over that year, that particular day. And it wasn't the biggest of wallets, so it hit exactly there. So it was a shallow wound, and it poked in. There's a bit of a problem there, a bit of a muscle loss, and definitely it became a problem as we were walking, but I was able to walk. One other person with us also had a gunshot wound, but this had it was relatively lighter as well. It had gone on the top of his leg through some muscle, but could have been a lot worse as well. So yeah, we maybe if you want, I can go through a couple more details.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were taken. We drove for about an hour. Then the vehicle vehicle stalled, or stopped working. It was a windy road and they were going very fast and sometimes not able to stay on the road. So we went through trees and bushes, and at one point, the car gave up. The Land Cruiser is a great car, but you can only knock down so many trees with it before it stops. So then we started walking. We walked for a bit, and then this was 1 PM in a very dry, dusty place. It's just on the equator, and there's no rain there much in the year, so it's very dry. And anyway, so from one. We stayed under this bush. We were taking shade under a bush, not knowing what was going on. And then by sunset, we got up and we were pushed to walk. So I guess for the next 3 days at night, we would walk 9 or 10 hours at night. And then during the days, we would take shelter under a bush and wait out the days. Of course, there's much more drama in there, but we ran out of water very quickly. We were drinking horrible, dirty, disgusting water. Any water that we could find, we were drinking it. Definitely, if you're working in that type of environment, I highly recommend water. I think my shoes saved my life. I think good footwear, like you hear the theory of it, but that was a very important thing.
Why is that? I mean, that I can perhaps guess, but what do you mean your shoes saved your life?
Well, on the bottom of my shoe, I have a photo of it, and I count about 250 holes or thorns that are still in there, where the thorns had gone through, and most of them stopped and didn't go through all the way. Some did. A couple of other people with us developed bad infections from cuts from the thorns that were around, and we got rescued on the 4th day. But if we had been there for months, as many people do in kidnaps in Somalia, a small infection on your foot could cost you your life. And I imagine that you survive a capture with some gunfight. You survive everything in the bush, but an infection through people who wear sandals in the field. I have stronger words for them these days. Get better shoes. So through the nights, we walked a lot. Through the days, we hid from the sun, and on the morning of the 4th day, the sky just lit up with gunfire, and there had been a militia that had found our track and had been tracking us. They were in contact with the crisis team, and the head of the crisis team, the regional director
of the organization you work for. Okay.
And they had agreed on attempting a rescue, and knowing that it was risky. The militia leader talking about, we don't know if we'll get them dead or alive, but we can get them today. And so they decided to go ahead with the rescue. And then the sky lit up with gunfire, and there was a lot of running. Our captors were away from us at that very instant, and they ran away. The rescuers ran and just shooting everywhere. And the 4 of us were together. We were low. We tried to dig into the sand, tried to just get as low as possible. And in an open field with sand, it's very hard to do that. And just this, I was probably very few times in my life I've been spending the effort, every single ounce of effort to do something. You see it sometimes at the end of a race or in a game of something, when you're just giving everything. And to dig lower, to compress your chest by not breathing so much, to move your feet, how to keep my toes down, my nose over, like anything to reduce 1% of surface area. And looking back at the casualness that was applied to safety and security before the incident, and to a lot of measures to prevent an incident compared to that moment, it's quite a difference. But yeah, we didn't know who these people were. They chased away our captors. We thought maybe we're being taken by a different group, and this would be just a different chapter of our story. But then they convinced us it was a rescue. They got us into our vehicle. They started driving away. Still, the gunfire was happening, and there was still an active shooting thing going on. And we drove away, and we got back to the Kenyan military, and then back to Nairobi, and out. We were safe.
So this wasn't the Kenyan military that rescued you; it was another militia.
Yeah, it was the militia. Yeah, okay. The Somali militia.
Right. Okay. Just to add confusion to the mix, and I just have to pick up on one point, and that is that the decision was made. Despite the call, we don't know if we're going to get him dead or alive. We can get him today. And someone made that call, and I guess the crisis coordinator would have.
Yeah.
That strikes me as an exceptionally brave decision.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that decision? I mean, it all worked out well, obviously, but what's your thoughts on that decision? Because that would not have been an easy one to make. Turned out to be the right one, I guess, in your case. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess mixed feelings. I have to flag a bias here. I got out and alive. And I'm absolutely grateful that I am out and alive. And I can't think that a day goes by and there's not some reflection of the time that I have that maybe I wouldn't have had. So I think the likelihoods in kidnaps in Somalia, the most likely outcome is that after a year or two, people get out alive. So, yeah, that's generally what happens. If you take any 10 rescue attempts, and I'm talking about SEAL Team 6 was in doing a rescue attempt. The French special services were in doing one. If you take 10 of these types of things, probably about half of them come out with people being alive at the end of it. Probably about half. It's thought to be the last resort if information is that the person's life is in imminent danger. Like the French special forces that went in to get somebody, 2 of them were killed, and the hostage was killed as well in that rescue attempt. And that's a high level, high skill level force. We had a militia that, I remember looking around in the vehicle when we were going out, and there was probably a 16-year-old behind the 50 caliber machine gun with the earbuds hanging off of his ears. And not necessarily a similar level. In court, I guess the person who made that decision was asked, what was your decision making about this? And he said, I couldn't live with the idea that they would be held any further or any longer. Like, okay, well, walk us through your decision making about that. And he was talking about, I couldn't sleep. I didn't sleep one moment when they were taken. And when I heard that there was an opportunity to get them, of course, we had to try it. We had to do it. And I think this goes back to unqualified people being promoted into positions where they're unqualified to make those decisions. So a sleep deprived person who is making life or death decisions. This isn't, I would say, what anybody, and I'm sure the organization also feels that wasn't our proudest moment. It was great to get them back, but things have to be tighter than that, for sure.
Yeah. More, in this case, more through luck than good planning. That's for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Well, I regret if that means that somebody else is held longer than than we were. 4 days. It wasn't 400, and the previous people that were taken went on for quite a long time, even after I was released. One of them 2.5 years, the other two close to 2 years, I believe. My goodness, like not only did I have that year or 2 year extra, but I also avoided a year or two of likely hell. And so I'm grateful for the outcome, but I do agree that they could do better. Yeah.
So just speaking about that hell, I mean, that must have been a harrowing experience, just not knowing what's going to happen. And of course, being wounded, and of course, having other colleagues there being wounded. How were those 3 or into the 4th day? What did you guys talk about? What did you guys worry about? What were your, describe those couple of days.
Yeah. I guess definitely there was different phases of belief and disbelief. At the beginning, very much a disbelief of sorts. I got shot, and it was probably the most painful thing I've ever gone through. But then with the continued shooting and my heart racing, and I was in a full panic attack, the fight or flight reactions of the body were there. I stopped feeling the bullet wound very soon after it happened. Like it was immediate, most painful thing of my life. And then what's happening? Not like this, not now. I'm not done on this world. Thoughts, moving around, getting put into another vehicle. Others, what's going on here? There's a lot of blood. There's who are these people? There's a lot of guns. There's a lot of people with guns. They've searched us. We've been around people with guns before. We've been on visits to places where our national staff lead us around. We're kind of being led. What's going on here? This isn't a kidnapping, is it? No, that happens to other people. I hate to say it, but there's some parts of logic that just got missed. Yeah, this isn't a kidnap, but this looks a lot like a kidnap, but no. And I think it was actually when a friend or a colleague said, "We're being kidnapped, aren't we?" But maybe that's what a kidnap looks like. Extremely messy and confusing. And it was about 45 minutes later that the searing pain started again in my leg, and I looked down, and there's the blood, there's the hole, and that's going on there. But over those days, definitely disbelief, but then definitely, okay, wait a minute, like a lot of thoughts to family and friends back home. Definitely thoughts like, wow, if this is my end, how the story ends for me. Wow, this career, these choices that have led me here, how does that sit with me? For sure. Some thoughts like that. And actually, I think that going into those darker places where you question things, my life has changed since, for sure. I live differently now because of seeing the fragility of life, and yeah, for sure. But there's practical things. I've spent a lot of my time out in the woods in Canada and other things, so I know the stars. I know some things about field first aid from time with MSF in South Sudan or other places. I know dusty wounds are going to get infected. We got to treat those, and but it was difficult, and I think everybody reacts differently in those situations. But I think that idea of belief, disbelief, and even getting rescued, and then we're back. Like, okay, I'm again in a disbelief time, and that's a struggle, I think. And I think the quicker you can understand it, then the better for everything.
Yeah, but I guess it's not something one's gone through before, so it just doesn't marry up with any expected outcomes in the real world that one is normally used to. So it's certainly not, fortunately, not something most of us experience on a day-to-day basis. But after the rescue, how long did it take for you to realize, hold on a minute, I'm actually struggling with what's happening here, or how did how did the picture unfold afterwards?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I would say part of it was a blur. Like there was, um, you know, I find the concept when the release happens, there's such a relief to the crisis team, to all the
Mm.
colleagues, to families, and everything, and to the person for sure. But then when you're doing a lot of debriefs, you're reliving it a bit, and you are getting these flows of adrenaline and all the chemicals. And when you close your eyes, there's the things. There are
Mm.
the scary moments. Um, you know, something that only came to me this year or within the last year, and I'm 9 years and a few months past this incident, and I'm still learning and getting better on things. I had a really hard time with shadows at nighttime in a parking lot or somewhere where there was a shadow. I would have a huge avoidance of that, and I guess I only realized that when we were walking at night, there was only the stars and the moonlight that was lighting our way. And often one of our captors might be up ahead off
Mm.
the path a little bit, just letting us walk by. And for the observer, you're walking along, then all of the sudden the shadow starts having this image of somebody, and they were one
Mm.
of our captors, or and yeah, that association was there deep in my mind. So yeah, the release happened, but I feel that there was this cloudy transition time where I was still in it a bit, or my mind was in it a little bit. I got home probably 5 days later or so. I'd seen a lot of medical people. We had some first response psychosocial people come by who, I guess they did. Half of our session with them was just getting some of the details. Oh, wait a minute. So you were working in Somalia? No, we were working in Kenya. Okay, but you said that you work with Somalis. Well, yeah, they're refugees. So they're Somali refugees. So you were in Somalia? No, we
Oh
they
God.
moved across the border. So um, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
so some of that was happening. But yeah, then I got home, and when when is it still jet lag, and when is it not jet lag anymore? And I think in the or I understand in the normal people who've gone through a traumatic event, yeah, it's natural for a couple of weeks of things to be unsettled, but it's after that you, if it's not going away, and getting a good balance again of gained wisdom but not hypersensitivity or hypervigilance, then you should start worrying about things. But also, I had known through with MSF that meeting up with a psychosocial person is also about information, as you would going to or coming back from a malaria zone. You say, oh, hey, this is just an information session. Malaria is like this. Here are some of the symptoms to look out for. So if you see any of
Mm.
those, yeah, here are some ways to get support. So I had that kind of structure, or knew about that structure. So I did see somebody. I was able to find a trauma specialist, and yeah, he said, my schedule's really full. Maybe I can refer you to somebody else. But just tell me what happened. I said, well, I was working in Kenya, and I gave him a couple of the details, and he said, well, that's important. When are you available later today? And he cleared some time and saw me. And yeah, he was very good about really picking up on a lot of things that I was going through. Like, how was your drive over here? and he could see that I was still breathing quite hard. And I guess I had stopped at a traffic light, and somebody, I don't know if this happens with you, but people would get a squeegee and just kind of slap it onto your windscreen to start washing your window coming from out of sight, so that you couldn't refuse their service, and then you're forced to tip them. And just that slap on the windscreen, and like just a surprise being inside a vehicle right there. And yeah, so let's talk about triggers, and let's talk about these sort of things. Yeah, it was quite something.
Just on that, the trauma that came into it. So you said you started seeing somebody, but at what point did you realize, hold on a minute, actually, I am actually really suffering, and this is having a significant impact on my life?
You know, I was again going through a belief disbelief phase, and there's a lot of games that one can play against their best interest, I think, in such a time. You say, yeah, you know, I'm still jet lagged. That's why I'm sleeping oddly. Yeah, it's been more than 2 weeks. It's a bit much to get over 8 hours. Yeah, the hypersensitivity. Yeah, it's just because it's a new thing. I because I'm jet lagged, I don't want to be around people or things like that. Definitely explaining things away. I was shot, but I was quite lucky. My wallet got shot, and I was just behind that. Other people got shot worse. Other people this. Other people. You know, it was actually the first letter that my psychologist wrote to the organization to say he's not cleared for work, or I'm not clearing him for work. Here's a letter describing some of those details so that you can continue support. Where he wrote the starts of, or the incipient PTSD, I think, was his words. But this is early. Post, we can diagnose it more firmly later. But these are clearly, he exceeds the threshold on a number of different criteria for PTSD. And that was when it really hit me. I thought, wait a minute, PTSD, like soldiers get that. I'm just a guy, and he had to give me some straight talk. No, you're just a guy that got shot or attacked, shot, kidnapped, and then saw other people injured as well. At what point do you allow yourself to also agree that you might be suffering from some of those types of things? And you know, I think that was a fundamental point where once something has a name, then it has symptoms that you can learn about and start treatment and start getting better. If you, going back to that other medical analogy, if you just had fevers and bone aches and you didn't know what malaria was and how to treat it, you'd probably muscle through a lot of things and hurt yourself and maybe die from it. And instead, I wanted to get better. And so doing exercises and really confronting it and trying to do better with it. But yeah, the symptoms were hypersensitivity, hypervigilance of the shadows, definitely an anxiety and panic attacks. I would get panic attacks when the idea of going into a place where there's risk, like the street in Toronto. I would see somebody unzip their jacket, and I would get out of there because clearly they're unzipping and they're going to pull out a gun. Those types of things were going on. It was quite bumpy, I must say.
And you mentioned some of those kind of tools that helped you along the way. I mean, it's been now, what you said, 9 years. Firstly, how are you doing now? Because if I understand PTSD correctly, it's a condition that one needs to learn to live with. And also, what were some of those tools that helped you? You know, how do you manage it on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, great questions. Yeah, I do believe it's a thing, and I think that with work, and probably there's no shortcuts, or at least I wasn't able to find any shortcuts, even though I tried. With work, you can get better with things. Right now, I can talk about the story without getting any adrenaline jolts, and my heart probably stays the same. Some parts of the questioning I haven't gone through as the story with my psychologist, so I'm bored with it. But one of the things that I was doing was just going through the story 45 minutes a day to get that rise and then fall of adrenaline and other things, so that it just becomes a boring story. And then you can stick it in a box and stick it away and move on. And when somebody asks you about it, or you see a headline of a kidnap somewhere else, or triggers to that story, then you can actually approach it in a calmer way and say, oh, well, it's quite bad for them. As far as me, yeah, I've got my story. It's in that box. And if I have a little bit of unsettled thing that I want to think about, I write it down on a pad of paper and make an appointment for myself. No, right now I'm doing a piece of work. My mind wants to think about something there, and I make an appointment for myself to do that. So my brain understands that there's a time for that, and it can't just interrupt me at any one time. Whereas I would say that beforehand, yeah, a story would come up on BBC and there goes my day. I wouldn't be able to function for a day, just on all of the ways that your mind wants to recalculate, like survivor guilt. There's a whole topic of going through, or what if, like, yeah, what if we tried to escape? What if we did this? What if we did that? That can occupy a ton of time as well. But I would say, for me, the success was working with a trained professional. For me, it was a trauma psychologist, but other people might have spiritual leaders but professionals on this, as well, just with that approach that things come from things. So when I was going through a triggered reaction, afterwards, I would remember, okay, things come from things. I'm going to work with my psychologist to pick this one apart, and then come up with exercises so that it wouldn't have a similar reaction. So either I would see it coming and I would slow down a little bit, or when it was happening, the early stages of it happening, I could, again, try to lower the impact of that trigger.
It's amazing. Yeah,
it's a lot of work.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, what struck me is the way you refer to the mind, as almost a third person, and I find that really fascinating. I'm a long-term meditator, and that's one of the things about meditation, is that you realize that the mind does its own thing. You can't fight the mind. You can't, you can't stop thoughts. But I think becoming removed from one's thoughts as though they are a third person, is a tool that works, I guess, as you're describing, in dealing with PTSD, but also in everyday life as well, to not let the mind carry you as though it's a river that just takes you with it. But I find that particularly useful insight, as well as the making an appointment with your mind. I hazard a guess that that's a useful tool for all of us to avoid the continuous chattering mind interrupting, but particularly for somebody where trauma is trying to make itself felt and known in the most inconvenient times, I guess.
Yeah, I'm very hesitant to offer generic advice, but I do like bringing up that example, because some people are hesitant about what value can come from psychotherapy. And I do like to use solid examples where I would take 3 hours to get through a paragraph of reading about a difficult topic because of all these distractions from my mind saying, "Hey, I want to talk about that. Hey, I have a thought. We gotta talk about this. Steve, you said we would address this at some point. We
Mm,
haven't. I've got feelings, or
yeah,
whatever it
yeah,
is."
yeah,
And
yeah.
this one exact tool for that setting that somebody helped me learn and exercise and use has been monumental in my ability to focus better. Um, that's the type of value that I find with psychotherapy or professional assistance.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are hesitant. There's stigmas with mental health and support for it, but wow, so many things. And just to your point on separating oneself from their mind, I really feel that my mind started doing that first. I came in second, but it was really my psychologist describing to me when he was hearing about my sleep difficulties, where he just asked, "Are you falling asleep, or having problems falling asleep, or having problems going asleep, or going to sleep?" I thought, "Well, what's the difference?" And he said, "Well, difficulty falling asleep is you turn off the light, tuck yourself in, and you can't go to sleep. Whereas difficulty going to sleep is you have a hard time turning that light off." And that's your mind saying, "You know what, boss, we let you down. We admit that, but we got a new plan. No more sleep. And we got your back." And
Mm.
yeah, I was up till 5, 6 in the morning, struggling to stay awake. And it wasn't me; it was my mind saying, "New
Mm.
plan. This is what we're doing." And I tried to outsmart it. I tried to not nap in the day. I'd be exhausted by the end of the day, and then boom, 8,
Mm.
9, 10 p.m. Eyes would be open. There's no way I'd be able to go to sleep. I was a sleep deprived zombie for a lot of my earlier months, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and we know what sleep deprivation does to us. I mean, it's what is it? The thing is, after 18 hours, we're sleep deprived. We're basically legally drunk. The other thing, just on that point, I mean, it's something that the military has had to reconcile with as well. It's only in the recent years that the military, as an institution, certainly in Australia, but I guess in Canada, US, sort of the Western militaries, has only recently started paying proper attention to trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, moral injury, on all of these types of things. Now, this is an institution that is designed to go to war, and one that's had to deal with PTSD forever. Just never called it that. So there's a inculcated sense of trauma that comes with service that has been recognized, at least publicly, since Vietnam. But that's not something that is necessarily discussed or recognized in the development industry, at least not to my knowledge. Certainly not as institutionally, which is, I think, where your battle with the organization you worked for actually started. Is that the tap was turned off because at some point you were, quote unquote, healed, and then you are now someone else's problem. How did it get to that?
Yeah, it's a great question and descriptive lead-in. Yeah, I guess as I mentioned, I was in the sleep-deprived, traumatized phase. I had a physical injury as well. And the organization supported me for the first months after that, but then said this is an insurance issue. And the insurance companies said, yes, absolutely, no problem. We'll support you. Just send us all the relevant documents. And so I tried to understand what the relevant documents were and get those over to them. And they took quite a long time to digest them. And then they said, well, these are 3 months old now. Okay, we have updated documents, and we want some specific ones. Can you give us all the relevant documents? And so I would try to interpret what they were saying and get them more. And sorry, summer break was long, these are outdated, can you send more? And it just went on like that. I'd asked the organization to help me with this, and they said, it's really for your confidentiality, it's the insurance. And I was just in this mess of myself not being completely capable to navigate a new landscape of the medical expertise that I need for that. I had an orthopedic surgeon. Well, we want something else. And I got a spattering of different medical people. They said, oh, we want a psychiatrist, not a psychologist. Okay, well, I didn't know the difference there, but okay, I'll get that. Well, it's using different designations for PTSD than we use in Europe. And it was a difficult landscape to understand. And I would say that I was not at my highest performance at that time at all. And so it was difficult for me to go through that as well. And then there was just some outright unhelpful things. Somebody very senior in the organization said, yeah, Steve, I heard PTSD. You just got to get out of bed. You got to shake yourself off. And I thought, bed, that's the place where the nightmares are. I would welcome sleep if I could have it, but I'm a zombie right now. Yeah. So it was difficult like that. And also after some time, the organization said, no, this is insurance. And I also had some questions about the incident. What happened? Like the report that I saw a couple months after, I was never asked to comment on it, or like I was never interviewed. I was the longest standing senior staff member in that program, and I wasn't asked on this. I had raised several security concerns before. Several other people involved were not involved in the interviewing. I was given a copy of it the night before I would be commenting on it, and it was a 117-page document. It was it was odd, and I had a lot of questions. And after maybe half a year or so, they didn't want to hear any more questions. And my injuries were for the insurance company, and they had lowered their reception for me. Yeah.
Wow. And then, which of course is then ultimately what forced you to then take the organization to court. Is that
no,
right?
No.
Okay.
No. Then I looked for a lawyer who could help just open the door to the conversation again. So yeah, I finally came to one who was quite aligned with. I want some coverage for losses. They weren't paying medical bills, and my psychologist and the insurance company was playing games. And I wanted some questions on the incident, and so a lawyer was able to open the door. Now the conversation started again, but then it came to a similar conclusion, and then they stopped agreeing to meet with us. And we had four times where we'd asked for a meeting where I would fly to the headquarters, and they just had to come to a different building in the same neighborhood, and they said, no, it's not worth it for us. Sorry, keep pushing.
What was the resistance? I mean, was it the reputational exposure, or what? I mean, because it just strikes me as I don't want to say inhumane, but yeah, it just strikes me as unusually callous.
Yeah, I think some of the senior management were not given all the details. So they'd say, well, it was residual risk. There was nothing that could have been done. And I think this was quite a line that was brought up actually right after the incident happened. The first press releases that came out was there was nothing that we could have done to have avoided this as part of residual risk. And well before any review had happened. And I think a lot of the senior management and board members who've told me afterwards that that's the line that they were given. And that's what they believed. Why wouldn't they, from the senior management? So any questions that I was raising, it was a non-starter. There was not a willingness to listen to that. As far as the injury side of things, I had started asking for some coaching and some retraining and a bit of salary support for that transition time. They said, well, you could have 5 hours of coaching, and we'll talk about the others once things go on. I couldn't get a coach for 5 hours. 10 hours was what I got. And they said, well, with that, you can't have a training course. And I thought, and the salary, that's an insurance thing. And yeah, so that's sort of where things started diverging. And yeah, then I was looking at, okay, the more and more letters I was getting, the more they were saying permanent disability. Then we started talking about lost earnings, and then those discussions came there. And I think there was kind of an effort that if they engage with that, then they might be believing it. I don't really know what was going on there, but I do know that, yeah, there was a number of tactics, I would say. There was just hundreds of pages of documents that were sent to my lawyer that I think were being used to exhaust any finances for his time. By the time it went to court, there's 2,500 pages that were submitted to court, and there was definitely more correspondence that were irrelevant that neither of us brought into court. Yeah, they were countersuing me at one point, and I think that was an attempt to get me to just walk away and back down. You don't have this, and I think their position was quite clear that, yeah, we've got recommendations to make things better, but there's no negligence involved. So stop talking about that. And yeah, so we disagreed with things, and then it was almost 3.25 years later that we actually went to trial. There was 3 solid years of internal attempts to discuss this, and hidden from media, hidden from everything, like really try to embody the whistleblowing of it's the duty of everyone to escalate misconduct.
Yeah. And I guess the inevitable fact is that they were also worried about setting a precedent, because that's what it ultimately ended up being. The win was a precedent-setting victory, which I guess for the industry as a whole is quite important, because it actually gave those who otherwise remain in the shadows a voice. Is that how you see it?
Well, I think all the way up to the trial, it wouldn't have been a precedent-setting situation. It would have been injured staff member, some disagreement on how going forward, and then coming to an agreement, and that's that. But even through those 3 years, there was about 24 other staff members from the same organization that were either killed or kidnapped in the same organization. And these were all talked about as residual risk, residual risk, residual risk. And I think I know that some people in the organization were also looking for a bit more of a precedent-setting thing, so that there's an ounce of oversight and accountability. The review that happened was by the head of security looking out over the major security incident, or the largest security incident for them. This wasn't quite the independence that a review would normally have. So yeah, I don't think they were afraid of the precedent. I really don't know at this point, but I think they just wanted it to go away. And a lot of their actions may be consistent with that, countersuing me and trying to send thousands of pages to my lawyer to digest and go through. But it didn't work. And we went to court, and actually at the beginning of court, they said, okay, we acknowledge the insurance isn't good enough, and it should be better, and that was a contributor to this, as well as our staff support was not good enough, and it should have been better. And on their closing arguments at the end of the court case, they said, we realize now that we were negligent, and they admitted to negligence in court there. They did say, but we don't believe it was gross negligence, but we see now that we were negligent, which I'm glad we finally came to that agreement, but it could have been years before. It would have been better for me, for sure.
Has it sent ripples through the industry, or maybe through the organization first, but then also through the industry to start paying more attention to? Because one of the things that's inevitable, that humanitarian and aid workers are often young, highly motivated, idealistic individuals who go to these far places to go do some good. They are not necessarily, highly experienced in legal battles or understanding the ins and outs of international law, how insurance applies. I put myself in this category. I mean, I was in Iraq for 8 months, and it was after the company that we were working for collapsed. We realized that we had never had insurance, even though it was part of our contract. And I was assured, no, you have insurance. But I was naive as well to not get things clearly articulated and explained. And I'm sure, this happens all the time. All right. So has this had kind of some sort of a ripple effect, first in the organization, but then beyond as well?
Yeah. I think in the organization, for sure. Definitely, people have thanked me in the organization and up through their ranks. That I didn't know that part of the incident, or I didn't know this about what happened. Some people have talked about the activities that they've done to implement duty of care, and that's really the core concept of this. If an organization deploys you somewhere, they have this duty to care for you, to put reasonable measures in place to protect you from foreseeable risks. And I'm picking those words quite carefully. Reasonable measures. So, you're not going to wear armored suits and armored vehicles for a 9-month deployment somewhere. That's not reasonable. But reasonable measures and foreseeable risks. If a meteor comes out of the sky and hits you on the head and kills you, that's likely not a foreseeable thing. So that type of thing. And so it comes out in like informing staff about what the risks are, so that they know when they say, okay, I don't mind being involved because there is a residual there. And if I get hit with that residual risk, I can accept that. But you have to know about what that residual risk is. There's many other elements of it. So, I believe the organization has very much embodied a lot of this. And unfortunately, they said that right after the incident, but too many people in the organization told me they are still back to their old ways. And those multiple incidents afterwards where they say the same thing, there was nothing we could have done. And if in all the incidents, mine's the only one that was looked at, and it was found to be gross negligence, I suspect that there was some other learning that could happen in those other incidents that might have been glossed over. So there, for sure, the aid industry, a lot of people have told me as well that this case has opened up the conversation to how are they vulnerable to the risk of not upholding a duty of care, both in trying to protect their staff and prevent things and manage things well, but also the post-incident care. I would say that I struggled to find cases similar to this to help guide me. And now I get a lot of people contacting me because they are guided by this, both on the organization side of things, as well as the individual side of things. The organization's trying to do better, and the individual who's in this cloud of not knowing things and not, I used to run food, and now these insurance forms are complicated, or whatever it is in their cloudy landscape, trying to get some help with it. Yeah.
And I can only imagine, I mean, and without taking anything away from your efforts, you are an educated, highly educated person living in a country where laws actually matter, working for an organization where laws actually matter. I can only imagine what this is like for the locally employed staff, and it would be remiss of me not to mention the staff member that got actually killed on the day, and his family and their struggles, because I suspect they wouldn't have had even an inkling of any recourse that they could have against the organization and what's happened. And I suspect that's the case for them and for thousands of other cases where people just don't even have, it is just a fact of life that, their loved ones have died. And, there is no means or avenues to even tell anybody about it, let alone, try and get some help with dealing. I suspect that would be accurate, right?
Yeah, I would say that the disproportionate distribution of good chance and luck follows this type of situation as well, for sure. To a lot of staff that are locally employed, support just might not be available. I know people with injuries where you're like, go see an orthopedic surgeon. Like, you mean the local doctor who did 1 year of GP training somewhere until the money ran out and then came back, but everyone calls him doctor. It's definitely a difficult landscape. And I do sympathize with a lot of aid organizations, even the organization I worked for. It's not an easy way to, or an easy thing to implement. I can't think of anyone who says we implement duty of care perfectly. That would be a red flag to find the liar in the room. No, it's very much difficult and probably disproportionately against people in the field by a lot of circumstance. And then there are other elements of, legacy situations. For sure. Yeah.
And conscious of the time and of your time, you now work as the person who you wished you had when you were going through this, if I understand your current job correctly.
Yeah.
But maybe if you can give us the description of what is it that you do now?
Yeah, that's a. I never thought of it the way you worded it, but yeah, that's exactly right. I am a case manager. It's sometimes referred to as a recovery coach, survivor advocate. The terms are quite loose. And again, I haven't found the exact situation that I'm looking for. I struggled a lot because I was alone and in an unfamiliar landscape at a lower functioning to how I normally function. I usually run complicated programs and I was knocked off my feet. So what I do is for other people who are off their feet, knocked by a trauma or a prolonged grievance, just very much out of their landscape. I work with them to get them the support that they need. So on the individual side, that could be getting a team together, a psychotherapist, a medical expertise who can start talking about of the various pain management options. Here's a good way to think of it forward, or possibly in the legal landscape, how there are many options. There are so many options involving a lawyer and some legal terms and situations without going to court. There's a lot of alternative dispute resolution expertise that can be put into here to help a person come to an agreement. I work with individuals to put the teams together for the support that they need. On the organization side, sometimes I've been called by the organization to support somebody. So paid by them, saying, we have somebody that has a problem with us. Can we hire you to be with them? We'll let them describe everything. We'll have no accountabilities towards you, but we just want our person to be fully supported. And that's probably the best way that this should work. And these are proactive organizations that sometimes have that expertise inside the organization, but they just feel, you know what, trust and bias and confidence building isn't there. We need to hire outside, and here's a service we'd like to dip into. From that, there's also learning and then policy work where people want to do better on how do they act during a crisis and after a crisis to best support people when they've been freshly injured or freshly into a crisis, how best to support them so they don't go through as deep of a dip as possible. So definitely being involved on that side of things, and for sure on the prevention things. The best way to stop a multi-million-dollar crisis management is with tens of thousands of dollars of preventative measures in place, or hundreds of thousands across an organization. And so really trying to make people aware of that side of things too. So that's it. That's what I'm in. I really wish I had somebody like this. And I hear good reviews of this. I hope to work myself out of a job with this. I hope that I can share the learning in the organizations and they can have these resources internally. That would be the best. But until then, we'll keep working.
I somehow doubt that that's the case, not because I am doubtful of the organizations. I certainly don't want to come across as though I'm casting a shadow of doubt, because most of these people that I've met in these organizations are noble individuals who want to do the right thing. I think it's just a matter of changing how we view situations, and that, that it's the same. The way I see it, it's the same as what happened in the military. It wasn't something that was considered as important. It was, as you kind of said, you just got to get up, mate. You just got to keep going. And that's how we dealt with these things until we realized, hold on a minute, that's not how we can deal with this. There are, second, third order consequences that we need to deal with. So, and slowly over time, it came out of the shadows as something that needs to be hidden away or something that can't be talked about, to something that needs to be, the support of which needs to be institutionalized and needs to be there for everybody. Recognition of the hardships that people go through, genuine hardships for doing good in the world. So just on that note alone, I congratulate you. I think it's fantastic. But maybe the last question I'll ask, I somehow suspect that this work also helps in your own healing. I imagine, because I guess you're paying forward, right? You're doing something for others so they don't suffer as in the same way that you have suffered.
Yeah. It's tricky. Like, it's not an easy subject matter. I often think that just opening up a pizza joint and selling pizzas all day would be maybe easier on my mind. I think it's meaningful. I think seeing somebody who is lost and desperate, and knowing suicide rates for people with PTSD, knowing the fact that 95% of people with PTSD break off of their marriages or long-term relationships. Wow, if we can keep some of those outcomes from happening, that's huge. That's meaningful. I want to be part of meaningful work. This is where I'm at. I've got the platform for it. The needs are there. I do share your thoughts that it's maybe we won't be wrapping up this year or next year, because these needs are complex. Unlike the military, a lot of people are from different countries that come to that organization. And they've worked with several different organizations, maybe picking up different traumas along the way. And maybe the last one is reluctant or doesn't have the resources to say, yeah, we'll take the psych bills and the longer term disability for something that maybe has built. Maybe there's other complications, and also the learning. Like, I applaud a lot of the militaries to be open to that conversation and the cause and effect structure, where some organizations might not have that resourcing to be open to that. And it's important. But there's a lot of initiatives as well. I see a lot of coordination bodies across humanitarianism that are trying to support each other, how to do the best implementation possible. There's still some front lines. So yes, across industry support. I get a lot of people who don't have the money and their organization won't pay, and they need full-time, concentrated, non-pro bono on the side support. There has to be funding for that type of stuff. There has to be psychosocial support for people who need it, and nobody's going to pay for it. There's a lot of front lines that still need to be pushed on this for sure.
Yeah, well said. And I think that's a safeguard that we need to have in place, because we want people to go and do these jobs, because these are incredibly important jobs, doing some incredibly important work around the world. Steve, it's been a pleasure. I know we've gone well past our originally agreed time, but it was a fascinating story, and I just couldn't help myself to dig in a few different angles. So I really appreciate your patience. Thank you so much for your time, and best of luck, and I look forward to chatting to you again in the future.
Hey, Maz, thank you very much for the conversation. I feel it's a very important one. I love your podcast. I think it highlights a lot of issues that need to be supported. And I hope your listeners get a lot of support when they need it. Otherwise, come contact me, and let's get you forward.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I'll share your contact details as well in the show notes. Steve, thanks a lot.
Okay, pleasure.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of The Voices of War. You can access all episodes on www.thevoicesofwar.com or by subscribing wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And while you're there, please give us a review, as we'd love to hear what you think. If you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, you can reach me on info@thevoicesofwar.com.